The Haunted Road We Should Never Have Taken. True scary story. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Tonight I want to share a story that still haunts me every time I think about it. This happened a few years ago during winter. My name is Shanto, and at the time I was working in Dhaka with four of my closest friends, Rafat, Sajib, Tanvir, and Abir. One December, we decided to take a short trip to Sylhet. Just a few days away from work, some fresh air, good food, and a little adventure. The trip went perfectly. But what happened on the way back is something none of us will ever forget. The night drive. It was around 1 a.m. when we started driving back to Dhaka. I was behind the wheel. Inside the car, everything felt normal. Music was playing quietly, Sajib was telling jokes, and Abir was scrolling through his phone. Then suddenly, traffic came to a complete stop. A massive traffic jam stretched across the highway. Truck drivers told us there had been a serious accident ahead. The road might stay blocked for 4 or 5 hours. None of us wanted to sit there all night. So we checked Google Maps. That's when we saw a bypass road cutting through a rural area. According to the map, it would reconnect with the highway after a few kilometers. It looked like the perfect shortcut. And that decision was our first mistake. The road felt wrong. As soon as we turned onto the bypass road, something felt off. The road was narrow and completely dark. Tall bamboo trees surrounded both sides of the road. Their branches leaned over us like giant arms reaching down from the darkness. For a while no one said anything. Then Abir suddenly spoke. "Guys, do you have signal?" We all checked our phones. No signal. Even the GPS stopped working. Tanvir laughed nervously. "Shant, you sure this road goes somewhere?" I forced a smile. "Relax, it's just a shortcut." But deep down, I wasn't so sure anymore. The dead tree. About 20 minutes later, we passed something strange. A huge dead tree stood beside the road. It was an old silk cotton tree. Its branches stretched out like skeletal arms in the moonlight. Underneath it was a broken concrete culvert. We drove past it. Nothing unusual happened. Inside the car, everyone started joking again. But about 10 minutes later, my hands tightened on the steering wheel. Because we were passing the same tree again. Tanvir leaned forward. "Wait, didn't we pass this tree already?" I tried to ignore it. Probably another tree that looks similar. But then we passed the same tree a third time. And suddenly, the car went completely silent. The man with the lantern. I pressed the gas pedal and kept driving. We needed to get out of there. Then, in the distance, we saw a faint orange light. As we got closer, we saw an old man standing by the road. He was holding a lantern. He wore a thin blanket around his shoulders. I slowed the car and rolled down the window. "Sir, do you know where the main road to Dhaka is?" The old man stared at us for a moment. Then he said slowly, "Take the road on the right ahead. You'll reach the main road." The lantern light reflected strangely in his eyes. We thanked him and drove off. The tea stall. But after 15 minutes of driving, we still hadn't reached the highway. Instead, the road became darker and narrower. Then suddenly, we saw something unexpected. A small tea stall beside the road. It was nearly 2 a.m. Seeing a shop open in the middle of nowhere felt strange. Smoke was rising from a kettle on the stove. The shopkeeper looked at us and smiled. "You're going the wrong way," he said. "Go back and take the left road." But something about him felt wrong. A rotten smell drifted from his mouth. Then Abir whispered beside me, "Shanto, look at the stove." I looked carefully, and my blood ran cold. There was no fire under the stove, but smoke was still rising. Without thinking, I slammed the car into reverse and turned around. As we sped away, we heard a loud, echoing laugh behind us. Rafet changed. After that moment, something changed inside the car. Rafet suddenly said, "Stop the car, I need to get out." I stopped near some bushes. He stepped outside and disappeared into the darkness. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Finally he returned. But the way he walked felt wrong. He climbed into the back seat and stayed completely silent. Then a terrible smell filled the car. It smelled like something dead. I looked at him in the rearview mirror. His eyes were shining strangely in the darkness. Suddenly he lunged forward and grabbed the steering wheel. His strength felt impossible. The car nearly swerved off the road. Then he spoke. "You shouldn't have come here." But the voice wasn't Rafet. It sounded like several voices speaking together. The thing that followed us. I don't remember exactly how. But somehow we escaped that road and found the highway again. None of us spoke the rest of the journey. Rafet collapsed and lost consciousness. After that night, he was never the same. Even today, sometimes he sits quietly by the window, looking outside, and whispering the same words. They're still there, watching, waiting. The Voice in the Factory, True Night Shift Horror Story. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Today's story comes from someone who worked the night shift at a factory. What he experienced during those nights is something he says he will never forget. This story begins after he finished his SSC exams. He was young and wanted to earn some money so he could buy a new guitar. His old one had broken, and instead of asking his family for money, he decided to work for it himself. After searching for a job, he finally got hired at a large factory. He didn't want to reveal the name of the company, but he said it was a well-known manufacturing factory. The job itself was simple. The workers operated machines and packed products. The factory ran 2 shifts, a day shift and a night shift. The first week went smoothly. Nothing strange happened. But everything started changing during his second week, when he was assigned to the night shift. The night shift. Working at night felt very different. The factory was huge, and during the night shift there were far fewer workers. The quiet hum of machines echoed through the building. Sometimes the silence felt uncomfortable. One night around 3 a.m., he started feeling extremely tired. He also had a habit of smoking, so he decided to step outside for a cigarette. The factory had a designated smoking area near the cafeteria, but it was quite far away. Walking there and back would take almost 15 minutes, which wasn't ideal during work hours. So instead, he decided to go up to the roof for a quick smoke. There were several elevators and staircases in the building. He chose the middle elevator and went up to the 4th floor, planning to use the stairs to reach the roof. But when the elevator doors opened, something felt wrong. The dark floor. The 4th floor was completely dark. No lights. No workers. He remembered that this section of the factory was used as a storage area, and it was usually closed at night. But he thought it might still be a quiet place to smoke. The elevator doors closed behind him and went back down. Now he was standing alone in complete darkness. The silence was overwhelming. He could hear nothing except his own breathing. He took out a cigarette and tried to light it. But his lighter wouldn't work. He tried again. And again. Still nothing. Then suddenly, he heard something. A whisper. A faint voice. At first, he thought it might be someone else in the building. But the voice sounded very strange. Almost like someone was mocking him quietly. He ignored it and tried to light the cigarette again. But the lighter still refused to work. Then he heard something else. A soft laugh. A woman's voice. This time he froze, because he knew there shouldn't be anyone on that floor. The door. Before he could react, something slammed against the storage room door on the other side of the hallway. The loud bang echoed through the empty floor. Now he was terrified. He clearly remembered checking earlier. The storage section was closed and there were no workers inside. So what had just hit the door? His hands started shaking. He immediately pressed the elevator button repeatedly. The elevator felt like it was taking forever to arrive. Meanwhile, he kept hearing faint whispers behind him. Finally, the elevator arrived. He rushed inside and pressed the button for his floor. As the elevator started moving down, he heard the whisper again, right beside his ear. But when he turned around, no one was there. It didn't stop there. After returning to his workstation, he tried to calm down. Seeing other workers around him made him feel a little safer. But the strange events didn't stop. Later that night, while he was working near the machines, he noticed something in the corner of his vision. Something moved quickly past him. He turned immediately. Nothing was there. At first he thought it was just his imagination. But then it happened again. A shadow-like figure ran past him, always just at the edge of his vision, never directly in front of him. And every few minutes, he heard that same whisper again, sometimes followed by a cold, quiet laugh. The truth about the fourth floor. He barely managed to finish that night shift. The next day, he told one of the senior workers about what happened. At first, the senior worker stayed silent. Then he said something that made his blood run cold. 3 years earlier, a female worker had been found dead in the fourth-floor restroom. Her body showed signs of severe injuries. After that incident, management stopped assigning night shifts to the upper floors. Most workers avoided that area completely. But sometimes, late at night, people still heard whispers coming from that floor. He quit the job. After hearing that story, he didn't wait another day. He resigned from the job immediately. Even now, whenever he thinks about that factory, he remembers the whisper he heard that night. And the laugh that came from the darkness. The black magic that destroyed my life. True scary story. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Today's story is very different from the others. This is not just a ghost story. This is a story about something many people still believe in: black magic. And according to the person who shared this story, it almost destroyed his entire life. A normal life. The man who shared this story asked to keep his identity private. But he said this incident happened in Bangladesh in 2024. He was married in 2018. After marriage, his life was peaceful. Within a few years, he and his wife had 2 children, a daughter and a son. He worked hard to support his family, and everything seemed normal. Like many families, they had small arguments sometimes, but nothing serious. Until one day, something strange happened. The suspicious phone number. One day his wife's phone stopped working, so he took it to a service center to repair it. While checking the phone, he noticed something unusual. One phone number appeared again and again in the call history. Dozens of calls. Curious, he decided to call that number. When the man on the other side answered, he immediately recognized the voice. It belonged to someone from his own village. An older man who was known for practicing traditional spiritual healing and sometimes black magic. He felt uncomfortable but said nothing. Instead, he quietly checked the call history again. The records showed that his wife had been talking to this man frequently for the past 3 months. Every few days. The truth comes out. When he returned home, he confronted his wife. At first, she denied everything. But after some pressure, she finally confessed. According to her, that man had told her he could give her something that would make her husband listen to her completely. Something that would make him obey her every word. He had given her a mysterious powder and told her to mix it into his food. But she claimed she never used it. The man didn't know whether to believe her or not. Still, he decided to forgive her and move on. He thought the situation was over. But that was only the beginning. The marriage falls apart. Over the next year, his wife's behavior slowly changed. She became cold and distant. She argued constantly. Eventually, she left with the children and returned to her parents' house. The conflict between the two families grew worse. Village leaders tried to mediate the situation, but instead of solving the problem, the conflict became even bigger. Finally, the marriage ended in divorce. After the divorce, he took his children and moved back to Dhaka. He tried to rebuild his life. But then, something strange began happening to him. The illness. In January 2026, he suddenly became extremely ill. He lost his appetite completely. For 5 days, he barely ate anything. He couldn't sleep. His body felt like it was burning from the inside. Doctors couldn't find any clear medical reason. The symptoms kept getting worse. He felt weak, anxious, and mentally exhausted. Sometimes he felt like something was draining his energy. His family became very worried. The discovery. Eventually, a relative suggested visiting a spiritual healer. At first, he refused. He didn't believe in these things. But when his condition kept worsening, he finally agreed. The healer listened to everything carefully. Then he said something shocking. He believed the man had been targeted with black magic months earlier. According to him, someone had used food to deliver the spell. And part of the ritual involved burying a magical object near a cooking stove. The healer claimed that every time food was cooked on that stove, the spell would continue affecting him. The final warning. The healer warned his family that the situation was serious. If the ritual object was not found and destroyed, the man's condition could continue getting worse, possibly even life-threatening. At the time he shared this story, he was preparing to travel back to his village with his family to find the object and remove the curse. He ended his message with these words: "If I recover, I will share the rest of the story one day. And if I do, please pray for me." A warning. Stories like this are difficult to prove. But in many parts of the world, people still believe in black magic and spiritual harm. Whether you believe it or not, this story reminds us that sometimes the most frightening things in life don't come from ghosts, but from other people. The shadow that followed me since childhood, true paranormal story. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Today's story comes from a man who claims that something followed him for years. Something he could never fully understand. Something that appeared in his life again and again, from childhood. And even today, he still wonders what it really was. Childhood at the madrasa. The man who shared this story is now studying abroad, but the events happened when he was only 11 years old. At that time, he was studying in a large madrasa in Bangladesh. He was very close to his father. Unlike most students whose parents visited every few months, his father visited him almost every week. The madrasa had strict security. There were 3 gates between the dormitory and the outside world. Students were not allowed to leave the campus at night. But one night, Something strange happened. The dream. Late at night, while sleeping in the dormitory, he had a dream. In the dream, someone came to tell him that his father had arrived and was waiting outside. Half asleep, he followed the man who came to call him. They walked quietly through the madrasa grounds, past the buildings, toward the main gate. The man then pointed toward a large drainage canal about 500 meters away. He said, "Your father is waiting down there." Confused, the boy asked again, "Where is my father?" The man replied calmly, "Your father is under the drain." That answer made no sense. And suddenly, the boy woke up. He was not in his bed. When he opened his eyes, he realized something terrifying. He wasn't in his bed anymore. He was standing outside, near the first security gate of the madrasa. He had somehow walked there while asleep. A security guard saw him and ran toward him. The guard asked, "How did you get here? The gates were locked." The boy insisted that someone had called him, but no one had seen anyone enter or leave the madrasa. Moments later, the boy fainted. The strange dreams. After that night, the teachers became concerned. One of the senior religious teachers gave him a protective amulet. For a few days, everything seemed normal. But soon the boy began having the same nightmare repeatedly. In the dream, he saw something horrifying. A young girl wearing red clothing. But her body was wrong. Her lower body stood in one place. Her upper body floated somewhere else. And her head hung separately by long hair. Her eyes stared directly at him. Then she laughed. A loud, terrifying laugh. Suddenly, the girl's legs started chasing him, running toward him while the rest of her body remained behind. Every time the dream reached that moment, he woke up sweating and gasping for air. The figures in the air. Months later, another terrifying event happened. One evening, he and several friends were standing on the roof of the madrasa, talking. Suddenly, he noticed something strange in the distance. Several dark shapes floating in the air. At first, he thought he was imagining things. But the shapes moved closer. There were 6 or 7 human-like figures, floating silently above the nearby rooftops. He asked his friends, "Do you see that?" But none of them could see anything. The figures moved closer and closer. And when they finally reached the edge of the roof, he fainted. The spiritual warning. After that incident, his parents took him to a spiritual healer. The healer gave him 2 blank pieces of paper. He asked the boy to recite a short prayer and blow on the papers. When the healer opened them again, Arabic words had appeared on the paper. The healer looked serious. He told the parents something disturbing. According to him, a malevolent jinn had been following the boy since childhood. The healer warned that the entity might try to harm him if he ever became vulnerable. But he also said something important. The boy's regular prayers and religious practices were protecting him. The entity could only approach him from a distance. The move. Eventually, the boy left the madrasa and moved to Dhaka with his family. For some time, strange things continued to happen. Sometimes he heard knocks on the window of their apartment late at night. But they lived on the 11th floor. No one could possibly reach that window from outside. When he looked out one night, he saw the same floating figures again, watching him. After that, a local imam came to the house and performed prayers for protection. The strange event slowly stopped. The end of the shadow. Years later, he moved abroad to continue his studies. Since leaving the country, he says he has never experienced those things again. But he still remembers the healer's warning that sometimes Certain shadows don't disappear. They simply wait. The spirit that wanted to marry him, true village horror story. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Tonight's story comes from a rural village. It's about something strange that happened to a man after a normal night out with friends. At first, it seemed like nothing. But by the next morning, his entire family realized something was terribly wrong. A quiet village night. The story happened in a small village, surrounded by trees and ponds. The man in this story had recently returned home from work after being away for some time. One evening, he decided to visit a few friends in the nearby market. It was already dark when he left the house. In villages, even 8 or 9 p.m. can feel very late because everything becomes quiet and empty. After spending some time talking with friends, he started walking back home. On the way, he stopped beside a large tree near the road. The tree had been cut down earlier, leaving only the base of the trunk. He stopped there for a moment, and then suddenly, something strange happened. The hot wind. As he stood there, he suddenly felt a strong wave of hot air hit his body. It came out of nowhere. There was no storm, no wind, just one sudden gust of hot air. He felt uncomfortable but ignored it. He simply went home and went to bed. But within minutes, his body started reacting strangely. Something was wrong. His eyes turned red. His body felt like it was burning. He became restless and aggressive. His family tried to calm him down, but he kept acting strangely. They called relatives and neighbors for help. Someone suggested reciting the call to prayer, azan, near him. When they did, his reaction became even worse. Instead of calming down, he began shouting angrily. He used language that shocked everyone in the room. It was like someone else was speaking through him. The truth revealed. Finally, they took him to a respected religious healer in the village. The healer began performing prayers and spiritual recitations. After some time, something incredible happened. The healer started speaking to whatever was inside the man. And it answered. The voice claimed it was not human. It said it belonged to a group of spirits living near the tree where the man had stopped earlier. According to the spirit, the man had accidentally stepped on it while it was sitting there. That angered it. But that wasn't the only reason. The spirit said something even more disturbing. It claimed it had become attracted to the man, and it wanted to take him away, to marry him. The battle. The healer tried to convince the spirit to leave. He explained that the man already had a wife and family. But the spirit refused. It said it would not leave. So the healer continued the spiritual ritual. Eventually, the man collapsed and lost consciousness. When he woke up later, he had no memory of what happened. But the healer warned the family that the spirit might try to return. He gave the man several protective amulets and prayers to follow. The final warning. For weeks the family stayed alert. Sometimes the man had strange dreams where a voice told him, "I will come back for you." But slowly, with prayers and protection, the strange events stopped. Even today, the family still avoids the place where the old tree once stood. Because according to the healer, some places are not meant for humans. The elevator that stopped on the wrong floor, true horror story. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Tonight's story comes from a security guard who worked the night shift in a large office building. For years, he believed that ghosts and supernatural stories were nothing more than imagination. But one night changed his mind forever. The night job. The man had recently started working as a night security guard in a tall office building. During the day, the building was full of people. Hundreds of workers moved through the hallways, elevators, and offices. But at night, the building felt completely different. Quiet, empty, almost lifeless. His job was simple. Every hour he had to patrol the building and check that everything was secure. Most nights were calm. Nothing unusual ever happened. Until one particular night. The empty building. It was around 2:30 a.m. The building was completely silent. The security guard had already checked the first 3 floors. Everything seemed normal. The only thing left to check was the top floor storage area. He stepped into the elevator and pressed the button. The elevator doors closed and began moving upward. But halfway up, the elevator suddenly stopped. The lights flickered. Then the door slowly opened. The wrong floor. The guard looked outside. The hallway was completely dark. But something felt strange. This was not the floor he had selected. He stepped outside to check the floor number. That's when he noticed something disturbing. The floor number on the wall read 13. But the building only had 12 floors. Confused, he stepped back toward the elevator. But the doors suddenly closed behind him. The elevator started moving again. Without him inside. Now he was alone. On a floor that should not exist. The footsteps. The hallway was silent. Too silent. Then he heard it. Footsteps. Slow footsteps coming from the darkness. Step. 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 The guard pulled out his flashlight and pointed it down the hallway. Nothing. But the footsteps kept getting closer. His heart began to race. "Hello," he called out. No answer. The footsteps suddenly stopped. Right behind him. The shadow. The guard slowly turned around. And for a moment, he thought he saw something. A tall shadow standing at the end of the hallway. But when he shined the flashlight directly at it, the shadow disappeared. Then the elevator suddenly returned. The doors opened. Without thinking, he ran inside and pressed the button for the lobby. The elevator dropped quickly to the first floor. The next morning, he told the building manager what happened. The manager looked confused. Then he said something strange. "There is no 13th floor in this building." The guard insisted that he had seen it clearly. But when they checked the building plans, there was no such floor. No hallway. No storage area. Nothing. Just 12 floors. Even today, the guard refuses to use the elevator during the night shift. Because sometimes, when the building is quiet, the elevator still stops for a few seconds between the 12th floor and the roof. As if someone is waiting there. The Last Bus at Midnight True Horror Story. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Tonight's story is about a man who experienced something terrifying during a late-night journey. It happened on a quiet highway long after midnight, when the world around him seemed completely empty. But sometimes, the quietest roads hide the strangest secrets. The late journey. This story comes from a college student who had to travel to another city for an exam. Because of some delays, he missed the earlier buses. By the time he reached the bus terminal, it was almost 11:45 p.m. The station was nearly empty. Only a few tired passengers were sitting on the benches. A worker at the terminal told him there was one last bus leaving in a few minutes. Relieved, he bought the ticket and boarded the bus. Inside, only a handful of passengers were sitting quietly. The bus driver looked tired, but the journey began normally. The quiet highway. After leaving the city, the bus entered a long stretch of highway surrounded by forests. Street lights became rare. The road was dark and silent. Most passengers fell asleep. The student sat near the window, watching the empty road outside. For nearly an hour, nothing unusual happened. Then suddenly, the bus stopped. The passenger on the road. The driver slowed down near the side of the highway. Standing alone under a weak streetlight was a woman wearing white clothes. She slowly raised her hand, signaling the bus to stop. It was strange. There were no houses nearby. No bus stops. Just trees and darkness. But the driver opened the door anyway. The woman stepped inside quietly. She walked down the aisle and sat near the back of the bus. No one spoke to her, and she didn't say a single word. Something felt wrong. The student noticed something strange about her. Her face looked pale, almost unnatural, and her clothes looked old, like they belonged to another time. He tried to ignore it and looked out the window again. But after a few minutes, he noticed something even stranger. When the bus passed under the next streetlight, there was no reflection of the woman in the window glass. Everyone else had a reflection, but she didn't. The disappearance. The bus continued moving. Another 20 minutes passed. Then the driver suddenly stopped again at a small roadside shop so passengers could stretch and drink tea. Everyone slowly got off the bus, but the woman in white stayed inside. The student glanced back at her as he stepped outside. She was still sitting there silently. After 5 minutes, the driver called everyone to return to the bus. The student walked back inside, but when he looked toward the back seat, the woman was gone. The driver's story. Confused, he asked the driver if the woman had gotten off the bus. The driver froze for a moment. Then he asked quietly, "You saw her too?" The student nodded. The driver sighed. Then he told him something disturbing. Years ago, a woman had died on that same highway in a terrible accident. Since then, drivers sometimes reported seeing a woman in white asking for a ride late at night. She would sit silently in the bus and disappear before reaching the next town. The empty seat. The student never forgot that night. Even today, whenever he travels at night and sees an empty road, he remembers the silent woman sitting at the back of the bus. And sometimes he wonders how many drivers on that highway still stop for the last passenger of the night. The apartment that was never empty. True horror story. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Tonight's story is about a man who moved into a new apartment, hoping to start a quiet and peaceful life. But after a few nights, he began to realize something disturbing. Even though he lived alone, the apartment never really felt empty. The new apartment. A young office worker had just moved to a new city for his job. After searching for a few days, he finally found a small apartment at a surprisingly cheap price. The building looked old, but it was clean and quiet. The landlord said the previous tenant had moved away suddenly, so the apartment had been empty for a while. The rent was low. The location was good, so he decided to take it. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal. On the first night, he unpacked his things and went to bed early. Around 2 a.m., he suddenly woke up. At first, he didn't know why. Then he heard something. Soft footsteps. Walking slowly in the hallway outside his apartment. He assumed it was another neighbor returning home late. So he went back to sleep. The second night. The next night, the same thing happened. Again at 2 a.m. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Walking past his door. But this time something felt different. The building was very quiet. Too quiet. And he suddenly realized he had never seen any other tenants in the building. The door. On the third night, curiosity got the better of him. When he heard the footsteps again, he quietly got out of bed. He walked toward the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. No one was there. But the footsteps were still moving. Step, 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 as if someone invisible was walking past his door. The knock. The following night, something even worse happened. At exactly 2 a.m., he heard 3 knocks on his door. Slow, deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. His heart started racing. He stood frozen in the middle of the room. The knocks came again, this time louder. But when he looked through the peephole, the hallway was still empty. The landlord's secret. The next morning, he asked the landlord if anyone else lived in the building. The landlord looked uncomfortable. After a moment of silence, he admitted something strange. Years ago, someone had died in that apartment building. A tenant who used to walk the hallways every night. At exactly 2 a.m. After that incident, most tenants moved away. Very few people stayed there long. The last night. That same night, the footsteps returned again. But this time, they stopped directly in front of his door. Then came the knocking. Knock, knock, knock. But this time, there was something else. A whisper. A quiet voice from the hallway. Open the door. The man didn't move. He stayed completely still until morning. The next day, he moved out of that apartment. Immediately. The question. Even today, he sometimes wonders something. If he had opened the door that night, who or what would have been standing outside? The phone call from my own number, true horror story. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Tonight's story is about something that happened to a young man late one night. It started with a simple phone call. But the strange part was this. The call came from his own phone number. The late night. A university student was staying alone in his apartment. His roommate had gone home for the weekend, so the entire place was quiet. That night he stayed up late watching videos and scrolling through social media. Around 1:30 a.m., his phone suddenly rang. He looked at the screen and immediately felt confused. The caller ID showed his own number. At first, he thought it was just a glitch. Maybe the phone network was malfunctioning. Curious, he answered the call. The silence. When he picked up the phone, there was no voice. Just silence. For a few seconds, he said nothing. Then he spoke. Hello. No answer. Only a faint static sound. Like wind moving through a microphone. Then suddenly, the call ended. The second call. He shrugged it off and went back to watching videos. But a few minutes later, his phone rang again. Once again, the caller ID showed his own number. This time he felt uneasy. Still, he answered. Hello. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then he heard something. A whisper. Very quiet. So quiet he almost couldn't hear it. It sounded like his own voice, but distorted. And the whisper said something chilling. Don't go to sleep tonight. The door. Now he was fully awake. His heart started beating faster. He checked his call history. Both calls had come from his own number. He tried calling the number back, but it immediately went to voicemail. Feeling uncomfortable, he locked his apartment door and checked all the windows. Everything was secure. Or so he thought. The third call. At exactly 2:00 a.m., his phone rang again. The same number. His own number. This time he hesitated. But eventually he answered. Before he could say anything, the voice spoke again, this time clearer. Someone is outside your door. His entire body froze. Slowly, he turned toward the front door of the apartment. The knock. Then it happened. 3 slow knocks. Knock. 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 Someone or something was standing outside his door. He walked quietly toward the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. But the knocking came again. Louder this time. The terrifying truth. He looked back at his phone. The call was still active. Then the voice whispered one last thing. Don't open it. Suddenly, the knocking stopped. The call disconnected. And his phone screen went black. The morning. He didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When morning came, he opened the door carefully. The hallway was empty. But something was lying on the floor outside his door. A burnt phone. The phone looked old and damaged. But when he turned it over, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The phone screen displayed a single number. His number. The mystery. To this day, he still doesn't know who or what called him that night. But sometimes, late at night, his phone still rings, and the caller ID still shows his own number. The Man in the Mirror was not me true horror story. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Tonight's story is about something that happened to a young man living alone in a small apartment. At first, he thought he was just tired, maybe stressed from work. But after a few nights, he realized something terrifying. The reflection in his mirror wasn't always his own. Living alone, the man had recently moved into a small apartment in a busy city. It was his first time living alone. At first, everything felt normal. His routine was simple. Work during the day, come home at night, eat dinner, watch something on his laptop, then go to sleep. Nothing unusual happened during the first week. But then, something strange started happening. The first time. One night, he was brushing his teeth in the bathroom. As he looked into the mirror, he noticed something strange. For just a split second, his reflection seemed delayed. When he moved his hand, the reflection moved a moment later. It was only a tiny delay. But it felt wrong. He blinked a few times. Then everything looked normal again. So he ignored it. The second night. The next night, something even stranger happened. He was washing his face. When he looked up at the mirror, his reflection was smiling. But he immediately stepped back. The reflection returned to normal. He stared at the mirror for a few seconds. Everything looked fine. He told himself he must be imagining things. Maybe he was just tired. The camera test. The following night, he decided to test something. He placed his phone on the bathroom counter and started recording a video while standing in front of the mirror. He waved his hand. The reflection followed normally. He moved his head. The reflection moved the same way. Nothing strange happened. Feeling relieved, he stopped recording and went to bed. The video. The next morning, he watched the recording. At first, everything looked normal. Then something happened that made his stomach drop. In the video, there was a moment when he looked down at the sink. But the reflection in the mirror was still staring directly at the camera for almost 3 seconds before slowly looking down. Exactly like him. The last night. That night, he avoided the bathroom mirror completely. But around 3 a.m., he woke up suddenly. He felt like someone was watching him. Slowly, he turned his head toward the bathroom door. The bathroom light was on. He was sure he had turned it off before going to bed. Heart pounding, he walked slowly toward the bathroom. When he reached the doorway, he looked into the mirror and froze, because the reflection in the mirror was already standing there, looking at him, before he even stepped inside. The reflection slowly raised its hand, but the man had not moved yet. And then, the reflection smiled, a slow, unnatural smile. He immediately ran out of the apartment and never went back. The question: he moved to another place the next day, but he never watched the recording again, because he keeps wondering one thing. If the reflection in the mirror wasn't him, then what exactly was living in that apartment? The security camera that recorded something impossible, true horror story. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Tonight's story comes from a man who worked as a night security guard in a large warehouse. His job was simple: watch the cameras, make sure nothing suspicious happens. But one night, the security cameras recorded something that no one could explain. The warehouse job. The man had been working at the warehouse for about 6 months. The building was huge. During the day, it was full of workers moving boxes, forklifts, and trucks. But at night, it was completely empty. Just long hallways, storage rooms, and rows of shelves. His job was to sit in a small security room and watch the camera monitors. Most nights were quiet, sometimes too quiet. The strange movement. One night around 3 a.m., he noticed something strange on one of the monitors. A shadow moved across the floor in one of the storage aisles. At first he thought it might be a stray animal. But when he looked closer, there was nothing there. Just empty shelves. Still, the shadow clearly moved across the camera. Checking the camera. Curious, he rewound the camera footage. The same thing appeared again. A dark shape moving slowly across the floor. But there was no object creating the shadow. No person. No movement. Just the shadow itself. He felt uneasy, but decided to check the aisle in person. The empty aisle. He grabbed a flashlight and walked toward the storage area. The warehouse felt colder than usual. When he reached the aisle shown on the camera, everything was perfectly normal. Boxes stacked neatly. No movement. No shadows. He walked back to the security room. The second recording. When he looked at the monitor again, his heart stopped, because the camera was now showing something even stranger. A dark figure standing at the end of the aisle. Tall, completely still. But when he rushed back to the same aisle, there was no one there. The footage. The next morning, he showed the recording to the warehouse manager. They watched the footage together. At 3:12 a.m. the shadow appeared. Then at 3:18 a.m. the dark figure appeared. But something about the footage made it even more disturbing. The figure had no face. Just a tall, human-shaped silhouette. Standing in the aisle. Watching the camera. The final discovery. Later that day, an older worker told him something unsettling. Years earlier, a warehouse employee had died in that exact aisle during a late-night shift accident. After that incident, strange things were sometimes reported by night workers. Shadows, footsteps, and occasionally, something appearing on the cameras. The last shift, the security guard finished that week. But he never worked another night shift there again. Because before leaving the job, he checked the camera recordings one last time. And in the final video, the dark figure was standing directly in front of the camera, looking straight at him. If you were watching those cameras at 3 a.m., what would you do? the hotel room that was never booked. True horror story. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Tonight's story is about a traveler who stayed one night in a hotel room that, according to the staff, should never have existed. The late check-in. A businessman was traveling to another city for work. His flight was delayed, and by the time he reached the city it was already past midnight. He was exhausted. All he wanted was a place to sleep. Most nearby hotels were fully booked. Finally, he found a small hotel near the airport that still had one room available. The receptionist looked a little hesitant but handed him a key. "Room 307, she said quietly. The empty floor. When he reached the third floor, something felt strange. The hallway was unusually dark. Only a few dim lights were on. He noticed something else. All the doors looked old and unused, almost dusty. But he assumed the hotel simply didn't have many guests that night. He unlocked room 307 and stepped inside. The room looked normal. A bed, a desk, a bathroom. Nothing unusual. The noise. Around 2:30 a.m. he woke up suddenly. He heard something. Someone walking in the hallway. Slow footsteps. Back and forth. Back and forth. It sounded like someone packing outside his door. At first he ignored it. But after 20 minutes, the footsteps were still there. Finally, he opened the door to check. The hallway was completely empty. The knock. He closed the door and tried to sleep again. But a few minutes later, 3 soft knocks came from the door. Knock. 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 He sat up in bed. "Hello," he called. No answer. He walked slowly to the door and looked through the peephole. No one was there. The phone call. Now he was starting to feel uneasy. So he called the front desk. The receptionist answered. He asked if anyone had been walking on the 3rd floor. There was a long pause. Then the receptionist said something strange. "Sir, there are no guests on the 3rd floor tonight." The next morning he checked out early. Before leaving, he mentioned the strange noises again. The receptionist looked confused. She checked the computer system. Then she frowned. "Sir, we don't have a room 307 in this hotel." He laughed nervously. "Of course you do. I stayed there last night." The receptionist shook her head. The hotel had rooms 301 to 306. But there was no room 307. Not on any floor. The final question. When he went back upstairs to check, the hallway looked completely different. The place where room 307 had been was now just a blank wall. No door. No room. Nothing. Even today, he still wonders something. If room 307 never existed, then where exactly did he sleep that night? The girl in the woods who asked for help. True horror story. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Tonight's story comes from a man who experienced something terrifying during a late-night drive. It began with a simple request for help. But by the end of the night, he realized that sometimes the people you meet on the road may not be people at all. The night drive. A young man was driving back home after visiting a friend in another town. It was already past midnight. The road he was taking passed through a long stretch of forest. There were no houses nearby. No streetlights. Just darkness and trees on both sides of the road. He turned on the radio and kept driving. Everything seemed normal. Until he saw something ahead. Someone on the road. Standing near the side of the road was a young girl. She looked to be around 12 or 13 years old. She was wearing an old white dress. Her hair covered part of her face. As the car approached, she raised her hand slowly, as if asking for help. The driver immediately slowed down. It was strange to see a child alone in the middle of the forest at night. He rolled down the window and asked, "Are you okay? What are you doing out here?" The girl spoke very softly. "I'm lost. Can you take me home?" The ride. Feeling sorry for her, he unlocked the passenger door. The girl got into the car quietly. She sat still and stared straight ahead. The driver asked where she lived. She pointed down the road. "Just keep driving." Her voice sounded calm, almost too calm. The car continued moving through the dark forest road. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. Something strange. After a while, the driver glanced at the girl. Something about her seemed strange. Her skin looked unusually pale, and she had not blinked once since entering the car. Trying to break the silence, he asked, "Are your parents nearby?" The girl slowly turned her head toward him and asked a strange question. "Do you believe in ghosts?" The driver laughed nervously. "Not really." The girl didn't respond. She just turned back toward the road. The accident site. After another few minutes, the girl suddenly said, "Stop here." The driver slowed the car. They had reached a sharp turn in the road. He noticed something on the side of the road. A small memorial. Flowers, candles, and a photograph. Curious, he stepped out of the car. When he looked at the photograph, his blood ran cold, because the picture showed the same girl sitting in his car. The disappearance. Panicking, he turned back toward the car. The passenger seat was empty. The girl was gone. The car door was still closed. No sound. No footsteps. Nothing. Just the silent forest around him. The truth. Later, he asked a local shop owner about the memorial. The man told him something chilling. Several years earlier, a young girl had died in a car accident on that exact turn. Since then, some drivers claimed to see a girl asking for help on that road. She would ask for a ride and disappear near the place where she died. The memory. The driver never took that road again. But sometimes, when he drives at night, he still checks the passenger seat, just to make sure no one is sitting there.